Hey guys, what's up? Hope you guys had a fantastic Halloween season, and I apologize for the lack of videos for the past couple of weeks, but now that I'm not as busy as I was initially, I now have some time to talk about some of the major films I saw this past month, and thankfully, there were a lot of really good stuff I saw, so I'm going to talk about some of the really good movies I saw this past October. The first major movie I'm going to discuss is Denis Villeneuve's Dune. Now, Dune was easily one of my most anticipated films of 2021. I do want to make one thing perfectly clear before going into this review, and that's I have not read the original Dune books at all. So if you're looking for a review that's going to talk about this as an adaptation, you're not going to find it here. So why am I so excited for this movie despite never reading the books? 2 words. Denis Villeneuve. Villeneuve is easily one of the most talented directors in the industry, and while I haven't seen all of his directorial work just yet, the guy has a knack for bringing some of the most well-shot, gripping, and engaging films to have ever come out in recent memory. The guy has easily one of the best track records I have ever seen for any director, as he managed to bring 5 films that are already considered masterpieces, all within the span of 5 years. To anyone who are fans of the books that were worried about this film being bad due to the nature of Dune being a hard-to-adapt book, I'll just say this. If Denis Villeneuve can make a Blade Runner sequel incredible despite coming out 30 years after the first, I say Dune is in pretty good hands. One thing I did do before watching this movie was checking out the original 1984 Dune for good measure, and it's not very good. And when I say this, I just want to say I adore the work of David Lynch, but unfortunately, his original version of Dune is not a very good movie and hasn't aged all that well. Gonna start right off the bat by saying that the 2021 version blows this original version out of the water, as Dune 2021 is a pretty stunning piece of work that serves as this really grand science fiction epic that we don't see that much of nowadays. One of the biggest praises I can give this movie deals with a major fault I had with the Lynch version. The main issue that the 1984 movie had is that it was plagued by horrible pacing that slows down the whole experience of watching Dune. The original film was primarily just exposition, but not done in a way that's engaging or beneficial to the story or characters. Just a lot of standing around and talking about the weird politics of this world. It makes for honestly a very dull movie with nothing exciting really happening. The 2021 version, while it is a slow burn, it's not slow to a fault like the David Lynch version was. Even when they have a lot of scenes of exposition, they don't feel nearly as tedious, as this movie does a really good job engrossing you in this world and characters, making them feel very much like real people. Where the Lynch version, they feel more like vessels to communicate the exposition this film has. Best example of this is look at how both films handle the meeting of the character Duncan. And you can already tell which is the more expressive and engaging scene. Even when it's slow, it feels more purposeful to help you really get into this world this movie creates, as this is an incredible looking movie from a production standpoint. Denis outdoes himself here by making this science fiction world feel so real. The debate between theaters and streaming has been quite strong for this one, but if you want my honest opinion, this movie definitely deserves to be seen on the big screen. The cinematography in this film is so incredible that watching it on a 4K TV on HBO Max simply doesn't do it justice. This is worth seeing in IMAX for being able to fully witness the grandiose set pieces that show how larger than life this world really is. So if you're willing to, I say it is definitely worth seeing in theaters, and is a big argument to why I think they're still the best way to see a movie. Even if you don't see this in theaters, there's still a lot to admire from this production, with the sets, costumes, and special effects all being at the top of their game here. Not to mention, this also has one of the best scores done by Hans Zimmer in quite some time. The music and sound design add to the immersiveness of Dune from Denis, with a lot of great use of taiko drums, making this film feel massive. All that definitely does get some points from me. And also, the story and characters manage to be quite captivating as well. Like I said earlier, they come across as more expressive than the 80s film, with us really getting to know these characters and their role in this galactic society, along with a good feel of each of their relationships with one another. Everyone does great in these roles, including Oscar Isaac, Josh Brolin, and this might actually be my favorite role featuring Jason Momoa. Though, if you've seen the advertising for this movie, be aware some of them don't appear as much as you think, leading to really my biggest issue with this movie, and that is that it does feel more like a setup, as this is part one to an even bigger picture down the line. There's not a lot of payoff to stuff being set up here, because this is showcasing only the first half of the book, where the second half is planned for an eventual sequel. But thanks to a surprisingly strong box office return and a lot of fan hype, it seems like we're thankfully getting that sequel, and I'm all the more game for it when it comes out in 2023, hopefully. Either way, definitely check this movie out, as Denis Villeneuve's Dune is a spectacular piece of work that managed to be one of the year's most enticing and stunning film experiences I've seen all year. It's another prime example of what a director can really do given a lot of time and money to create a world unlike any other that many have always wanted to see unfold for years. After nearly 50 years of waiting for a proper Dune adaptation, I think Dune fans finally got their wish. So definitely check this out. And I'm going to give Dune a 9 out of 10. The next movie I'm going to talk about for a little bit is The French Dispatch from Wes Anderson. I think by now the name Wes Anderson needs no introduction. Wes has had a huge cult fan base for quite some time now, and after so many films, his emphasis on symmetry and quirkiness has made him one of the most critically acclaimed directors out there. With me being a fan of Wes's work ever since I saw Fantastic Mr. Fox for the first time, of course, any film that he comes out with is something that I look forward to. And The French Dispatch is absolutely no exception to the rule, and after all the delays it dealt with this past year, the wait was extremely worth it. I'll start by putting it bluntly. If you see this movie, you can tell that Wes Anderson directed the shit out of this film. In terms of his craftsmanship as a director, he goes above and beyond here. There are probably hundreds and hundreds of shots that are incredible to look at and showcase how immaculate Anderson's directing style truly is. Not only is the symmetry there throughout the film, but he manages to utilize color very well, jumping from different color styles and aspect ratios all throughout the film. However, unlike other directors, this doesn't feel like style for the sake of it. Everything feels intentional for the sake of the story. They add to this film's newspaper strip structure, which, leading to the story itself, one thing I didn't expect from this movie was that it was going to be more of an anthology movie than anything else. Instead of it being centered on a certain amount of character, this has three major stories that feel like their own neat little thing that occasionally have some crossover. Each story is not only interesting in their own right, being very original, but also utilize the film's huge cast incredibly well. No one feels wasted in this movie, with all the different stories, and every actor featured here does a fantastic job. Whether they have a big role for their little story or not, we get a lot of great actors playing as these characters that are as quirky and over the top as you would expect from a movie like this, but not in a way that feels too extreme. Everyone gives it their all, from Benicio del Toro, Jeffrey Wright, and of course, what's a Wes Anderson movie without some sort of appearance from Willem Dafoe? And that's just to name a few of the big stars that appear in this ensemble cast. But like I said, this cast does not feel wasted, and Wes Anderson's impeccable direction really makes everything in this film so worth witnessing. There are so many fantastic moments here that all have the quirks you would expect from Anderson, even including a few animation segments that fit so perfectly with his style of filmmaking that it honestly becomes one of the film's biggest highlights for me. The French Dispatch is another fantastic work from one of the best filmmakers out there. If you're into really well-crafted filmmaking and a film that's super original, funny, and just all around clever, look no further than Wes's new tribute to writing. Absolutely one of the best films to come out in 2021, and definitely a must-see if you ask me. And I'm gonna give The French Dispatch excellent stuff. Go see it. And the final movie I'm going to be talking about for this video today is Last Night in Soho. Now, if I had to pick one movie that's my most anticipated movie of not only this year, but also technically last year as well, it would easily be Last Night in Soho. Since I have mentioned countless times in the past that Edgar Wright is without a doubt my all-time favorite director, as his movies are stylistic, energetic, and also infinitely rewatchable to the point where I almost never get tired of them. So with him making a new movie, that's always a guarantee to be something I'm obligated to see. With this, however, I was immensely curious due to how this was going to be Edgar Wright tackling a full-on horror film. Wright's been more recognized for comedy, which he is great at, but I'm always curious to see how very talented directors do with a different genre of film entirely. Plus, Wright has been noted as being a hardcore horror film buff, which isn't surprising. I mean, you all seen Shaun of the Dead by now. You know that he has a love for this genre. So it was going to be very fascinating to see how Wright would do something like this. And in my honest opinion, I felt Wright did an absolutely fantastic job. Last Night in Soho is every bit as stylistic and engaging as you would expect an Edgar Wright film to be. Starting with the look, this film is gorgeously shot, as the film does a great job replicating the feel of 1960s London's during the time travel set pieces. And as a horror film, this movie has a good amount of atmosphere, really emphasizing a ton of different colors, including very harsh neon red, blue, and greens, seen throughout the entire film. Atmosphere is of course an element of a horror film that can really turn it into one of the best of its kind. And this movie's use of colors helps it gives a very creepy, unsettling vibe. The film also has a great soundtrack with a lot of good songs that fit well with the time period, and also makes sense to the story as well, with the main characters having such a strong appreciation for that kind of music, which is something I definitely expect and enjoy from an Edgar Wright film. Also, like most Edgar Wright films, it's very well edited with a ton of quick cuts and a lot of good splicing together of scenes, making certain scenes feel rather seamless in terms of editing. Another aspect that is usually expected to be good in a Wright movie is definitely the performances, and here it's no exception to the rule. All the actors do a very fine job in every role, with the main highlights for me being Anya Taylor-Joy, Thomasin McKenzie, and the late Diana Rigg. Thomasin McKenzie essentially plays the main character here, and I really got into her character being an inspiring fashion artist that also feels like an outcast with her not fitting in and having a love for the 60s. She also manages to pull off so many different emotions very well, as she has a lot of range in this. I'll always be impressed with a performance that can very convincingly sound like they're actually crying for real. Of course, Anya Taylor-Joy has quite a big role in this as well, having a ton of range that expands more as the film goes on, and we see more about her character and the terrifying dilemmas she has gone through. And last, but certainly not least, is the late Diana Rigg, who I don't want to focus on too long since she's arguably one of the most important characters to the story, and I don't want to reveal too much with her, but let's just say she gave it her all with this final role, and she becomes honestly one of the most memorable characters here, especially in relation to the story itself, which the main aspect I wanted to discuss, as I noticed some mixed reception upon the movie itself, and I can't go into too much without spoiling it. This is a spoiler-free review, and maybe if anyone likes, I can do a spoiler review later on where I go into more detail. But despite some of the criticism the film has gotten story-wise, I personally don't quite see it, especially since most of the reviews I've seen have been rather vague, possibly due to risking spoiling others, and the ones that went into more detail regarding it are kind of looking at it at a surface level. I can kind of see where some may think the plot does talk about certain real-world issues in a lacking manner. However, I didn't quite feel that at all. In fact, one of the biggest praises I can give this movie is how it managed to be creepy and unsettling, not just because of the atmosphere, but much like the very best horror movies, it dives into themes that are very much dealt with today, and making the film all the more unsettling. It's not afraid to tackle some of these issues in a way that really showcases how truly disturbing and dark some of these acts witnessed in the film are. Even if it looks like it might showcase it as not as bad as first, by the end, the film really makes it clear It is horrifying, and honestly, gets even tragic for one of the characters involved in this scenario. By the end, I was really feeling the tragedy of what these characters went through in a way that was honestly paid off very well. It also helped that this movie was consistently enjoyable from beginning to end, with the mystery itself being very investing, and the third act also getting into its more stylistic and creepiest in a way that I honestly dug the hell out of. Plus, the film has a great overall message to add with certain things. No matter how much nostalgia can manipulate your feelings on a time period, there definitely are things that made it not as good, and in some ways fairly grim. It definitely stuck with me for many moments long after the film was over, making the whole experience a worthwhile one for sure. I did want to briefly address a couple issues I did have with the movie, especially as someone who has seen it twice now. I don't want to go into detail too much because it does dive into spoilers again, but there was one aspect in the beginning of the films that appears once and then only came into play at the very end of the film. At first, I was a bit confused by this decision, but watching the film again, I got more so what Wright was doing this time. Knowing what I know now, and thinking about the character's ultimate goal of trying to get away from a traumatic past, to have it come into play at the very end was actually fitting for this movie, and very appropriate for that character. However, even though that improved, there was an aspect that did get a little worse on second watch. Won't reveal here because, again, spoiler related, but let's just say there's a character that talked a little too cryptic and vague than they needed to be, and it didn't add up that much. It didn't ruin the experience for me, but was something that was like, maybe you should have cleared that up a little bit better. Despite that though, I fell in love with Last Night in Soho, from its mesmerizing visuals to its thoughtful and engaging story. It is a definite must-watch, especially for the Halloween season. Oh, well, Halloween's over, but who cares? Still check it out anyway, as it still managed to be one of the most memorable and fascinating films I have seen all year. And honestly, I expected nothing less from a talent so great like Edgar Wright. And I'm gonna give Last Night in Soho awesome stuff. Definitely check out all these movies when you get the chance, and I'll see you guys all again in the near future. Peace out, folks.
When you're alone and life is getting you lonely, you can always go, ach, Dune.